Nobody wants to end up in family court, but if you do, you want an honest, experienced family law attorney by your side to help minimize the stress, mental anguish, and legal costs that divorce and custody matters bring. Welcome to In Your Best Interest. Texas divorce attorney and entrepreneur Justin Sisemore of the Sisemore Law Firm, entrepreneur Andrea Jones, freelance writer Mary Maloney, and guests share insight on what to expect and how to handle family law matters, the changing landscape of family law, and living the entrepreneur's life. Now, on to the show.
If a physician tells you they recommend you get surgery, your friends will probably tell you to get a second opinion. Well, getting a second opinion during a divorce can be very helpful too. In today's episode of In Your Best Interest, the panel will discuss the different reasons you may want to hire an attorney as a divorce consultant and get a second set of eyes on your divorce or child custody case.
Thanks for joining us for this installment of In Your Best Interest. I'm Mary Maloney, and today, attorney Justin Sizemore, entrepreneur Andrea Jones, and I will discuss how divorce consulting works and when it may make sense to hire an attorney to consult on your case. So, Justin, acting as a divorce consultant is something that you really enjoy doing, along with your regular day job, of course, as a family law attorney. How did the consulting aspect of your work come about?
It started kind of in various different formats. And I want to start by saying, I know that divorce consulting sounds like some kind of crazy idea, especially if you don't have the resources to afford an attorney. Why should you have the resources to, or the thought to even consider the consulting piece? I would say that, a lot of our consults for people that don't have resources to even engage in this kind of conversation or think about it, a lot of our consults are in the form of consulting anyway. So I want to unpack kind of what consulting is in a bit, but mainly what happened to us several years back. I think some of you remember the Texas freeze hit, and we had a significant remodel project. And I always try to parallel businesses you've heard on the podcast before. I think a lot of businesses, if you really unpack them and go a few layers deep, you can see a lot of similarities. So in construction, for example, it was just kind of the blind leading the blind. They come in and they tear up your entire house, and then you're supposed to just trust a bid, trust the time schedules, and you don't really have a lot of knowledge of what's going on or what the plan is. And I just was like, man, there's got to be somebody that does this. And in fact, in construction, there's plenty of people that do it on the commercial level. It's kind of like anything else. If you search for an answer, generally you'll find that someone else has done it. And so when I started down that path, because I was very frustrated with the contractor, it's very personal, much like in a divorce case, right? You can be frustrated with your attorney. They can be giving you advice that you may not want to receive, or sometimes it's bad advice and you need a second opinion. If it's the former where you're getting good advice, but there's just some rift between process, and you're getting billed by your attorney, you're going through the stress of litigation, much like when you're building a house with a contractor and you don't really see eye to eye on some issues and you're not getting clear points. Sometimes it's helpful to have somebody that's very, very neutral and not involved and engaged in the actual day-to-day tasks of litigation. And so I said, well, this kind of sounds like a nice idea. Does anyone do this? And, as you get involved in these heavy hitting cases with big assets, what you find out is, yes, of course, there's people that do consulting work. Every company has a general counsel that is in the Fortune 500, and there's a reason for that. The general counsel is not the one who's going and filing lawsuits. The general counsel is not the one that's appearing in court. They're generally the one that is managing the flow of those caseloads, and they provide insight to the C-suite executives. If you look at companies and you look at parallels to business, you got to kind of say, is there a way that you can make this make sense to people and has someone else done it? My answer was absolutely, like I said. And when I started doing this, and granted, this is probably at this moment, maybe 5% to 10% of my practice. So it's not a huge part of my day to day. I do very much enjoy it though, because you get the ability to really work with somebody and let them experience multiple opinions. when your opinion is really being valued. And oftentimes in divorce litigation, unfortunately, as a lawyer, your opinion is not always valued. And so it's a nice alternative for me as an attorney to be able to be at a level where someone would care what I have to say enough to listen to it, and be able to really work with a client in a different format and capacity. The third and final reason, and long story long here, is we live in a tight knit community, and I think a lot of people worry about having their business on the street, specifically when you're in the day to day parts of pieces of litigation. And you find out a lot of things about people. So even though Fort Worth is a pretty big city, and we do stuff in all over DFW and throughout Texas in certain areas, you find that especially in the higher net worth people, the pockets get smaller. And people are afraid to use Sizemore because their kids go to school A or they're in country club B, right? And so what I was finding is that as my network get expanded, the city actually gets smaller. And so I've had cases that I've turned down that are very, very good divorce cases. I really want to help people because my kids would get bullied. There's big names attached to it. And if you're on the wrong side of those big names, sometimes, my kids don't get treated the same way in schools, or they don't get in the same clubs or cheerleading and all this stuff that, I don't want my career to impact them. So it's a way that I can help friends, people that I'm close with, people that I know through networks, and also people that are involved in really contentious litigation that the attorneys can't seem to land the plane because they've been arguing or disputing things for so long. So that's just kind of how I got into it.
So can you explain to listeners then what divorce consulting actually is? And we've talked before, like the different aspects of their case that you will go through with them during the consultations.
Yeah, and I'm always going to be a one-trick pony in that I believe from a standpoint of litigation, it involves in divorce cases temporary orders, discovery, mediation, trial. In that realm, you've also got a pretrial scheduling order to get your deadlines. Those are our key performance indicators or KPIs. I'll keep saying that a million times. And so each one of those steps, you may not need a consulting, may not need a consulting piece on valuation. You may need a consulting piece on, hey, we're living in the same house. We can't get a loan right now. We need to know some options of some financial pieces. Luckily, in my career, in addition to divorce litigation, I have a really expansive network, and I've done several businesses. And when you get kicked in the teeth a few times and you succeed a few times, you learn some processes, and then you learn some people. I've had bad accountants. I've had bad dentists, bad doctors. I've represented great people that have done amazing things, and people that were great that aren't necessarily so great anymore. And, reputations, especially in the surrounding network, do matter. And the more you're out there putting yourself out there and networking, the more you learn, and the more human beings that you can put in people's paths. So what I would say to that, what consulting really is, in a macro level, is analyzing kind of the trigger points, right? What are the pain points that you're suffering in the case? Are we midstream in the case where we've gotten past temporary orders and we're trying to get to mediation, but you're that person that says, my wife or my husband will never settle. We're both so far apart on this one issue, and we both want this one thing. And what I'm big on is helping people understand the different boxes that they can look at, and that they don't need to necessarily be in the box that they put themselves in. So expanding their mindset to different approaches. And then, when you get the case, my last one was small, closely held businesses, and, it's $100 million or so at stake. And in that situation, the wife very easily could have been persuaded by her attorney that we need to go down all these rabbit trails to chase down to the penny what somebody comes up with valuation on all these small, closely held businesses. In that situation, I think my main contribution to getting that case resolved was letting her know what it looks like to have control of a business, and the fact that she would have none, and who her boss's boss or her husband's boss's boss was, who I know well, who is a multi-billionaire. And there ain't no way that two people disagreeing are going to change the mindset of who has control of those small, closely held entities. So when you think in that example outside the box, and you're thinking about different ways to compensate wife for the value of those closely held businesses. Now, all of a sudden, we're looking at different forms of liquidity that are in the estate that are guaranteed. We're assessing risk of ownership of the business. We're not being told by one lawyer who candidly didn't have a lot of business experience, good lawyer, but not really any business experience. So you and also not really willing to even look at other business attorneys or talk to business attorneys or have them come do some of the drafting that is mission critical there. I think one of my criticisms of our profession, and I'm sure it happens with doctors and other professions too, is that no one is God's gift to this business. If you start to think that way and you don't keep educating yourself and surrounding yourself by people who are experts in their field, you will shortchange your client in some capacity. I mean, I just went through and ripped through a prenup last week where the parties spent a ton of money, and I mean a ton of money on this prenup. And I ripped through it in three sentences. I kind of speed read these things. I ripped through it in three sentences, and I pulled right to the issue. And I said, "Hey, what does this mean to you?" The client goes, "We've spent $100,000 trying to litigate that one sentence." And I think when you are not in the weeds of business or with a client, what you will find is that, it's really easy to assess issues and pain points from 30,000 feet, right? It's not easy when you're in the weeds. And so, I think that as a whole, what the consulting piece entails is it can be something as simple as the initial consult where we take a look at a simple estate and say, hey, don't go down these rabbit trails because the courts probably aren't going to consider much of this. It can be as complex as diving into each of those four parts and actually stepping up with different formats where I come in and say, hey, we need this person to do this. This valuation is wrong or off. I want this person to evaluate it. I can dive all the way into that. If we're getting the valuation pieces in child custody proceedings, obviously done thousands of cases on that scenario. So, hey, you're asking for this in this court. I can give some assessments or opinions about what I or how I would litigate it against myself. If I'm on your side, what I would push. If I think you're being wrong, hey, this is what the court can consider, and say it in a softer manner so it's more receivable. And then a final point to that is, I get brought in a lot of the questions where, hey, can you just kind of mediate this for us? Can you, I don't want you to represent both sides, but can you kind of tell me, what are some of the possibilities that happen here? And you got to be real careful there because you do have conflict of interest generally. And so when I get brought into kind of a dual role of giving people information, you got to be careful because you've got attorney-client privilege information that attorneys may not want to share with the other side. You also have, if I'm saying, hey, take this house versus this piece of retirement, somebody is going to have a tax consequence. And so there's generally conflicts of interest that result. But what I get most frequently is high-end people that are really well versed, and no divorce attorney is going to teach somebody who's made $100 million about how the soup was made or how the cow ate the cabbage. They already know for the most part what they want to do. It's structuring it in a format where we can look at the tax implications. We can put them with the advisors. We can separate it with secured transactions and secured interests. And they just want that added little, hey, what could the court consider here on both sides? And so that's where, if you've got a duality role there, you can sidestep some of the conflicts of interest that may ordinarily arise by giving advice from previous experience.
So you touched on the fact that obviously there are multiple attorneys then in these situations. So how do you work with those other attorneys? Because I mean, I would imagine that sometimes could get a little sticky.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing for attorneys to understand from my role in the consulting piece is I never try to, just like a mediator, good mediators never try to step on an attorney's advice, never criticize the attorney. I mean, I will be the first to admit I'm wrong a lot, right? But I do have some decent ideas sometimes, and if you say that with a level of humility that is actually encouraging and talking about how the attorney is doing their job well, I mean, I can tell you right now, You can pick up the phone and call these two people. I could give their names on the consulting piece. They were very thankful because, their client was calling them every single day and had a lot of frustration, a lot of pain points. And so the attorneys were actually very they thought it was very helpful to take some of that off their plate. And, the client was very trusting. And we actually ended up mending a relationship with an attorney who's a very good attorney, but his bedside manner is not the greatest. And he probably was tired of listening to some of the questions, which, we get paid to answer questions, but sometimes personalities just don't mesh. And if you're dealing with that over and over and over again and your personalities don't mesh, sometimes people shut down. Sometimes clients are overbearing. So it's a good way, in my opinion, to help curb some of that. And then if we're just at a point where an attorney is not being responsive and they're really doing a bad job. I mean, I go to the attorney, I go to my attorneys that work for me privately and try to rectify and remedy that. Kind of like a performance enhancement plan in a business. You try to remedy it, you give them the door number 1 and door number 2, and then you slam the door if you have to. And we do that with respect and courtesy, but I have gotten in there where I'm like, man, this is bad. And when you see something that's bad, when you're a surgeon or a lawyer or a builder or anything, you can't just sit idly by, but you have to understand why it's bad. You have to ask the important questions, how we got there. You can't just pile in and state a conclusion based on your 2-minute interview. And I think that's the big misconception of consulting. And again, long story long, you have to understand what your role is in the form of consulting. You can't just say, I'm a divorce consultant. I mean, I don't even know what that is, right? I'm a consultant on this piece, and here's what we're going to do. And what does success look like for you? What does that timeline look like for you? What are the costs going to look like for you? And if we get from here to here, do we deem that a success by this time, this cost, with these instructions? And I'm very clear to lay that out so that it's not this long drug out. I'm just now another attorney that's in the mix.
And I think
So
from a client perspective, like as a client, you don't understand the process unless you've been in it several times. And to have somebody else to look at it or help you make a decision, do we file something else? Do we try to get more information? Do we go to mediation at this point? Do we wait for mediation, even knowing what mediation is? Because the normal person, we all don't know that. We didn't go to law school. We don't know those things. And sometimes just like a surgeon might give you an advice, we don't know, is that really the right advice? That's how we started this. So I think the second opinion is super helpful, and an attorney should not be I don't think an attorney should be worried, because if they're doing a good job, Justin is then just confirming that this is really how this is. And as a client, I might not understand, and when I learn something it's how it's presented. Justin might present it a different way, and then I understand it better. My attorney might have said the exact same thing, but just a different way. So I think it's a huge benefit.
Yeah, Mary, we do that in our office. Like I can't tell you how many times either myself or one of my attorneys goes, I just said that. And you said the same thing, and they just like light bulb went off. And it's
Mhm.
sometimes just how it's received, and it's sometimes timing, right? And feeling and emotion. And it's just a nice thing to be able to help people through, especially if you're mending a relationship with kids. And sometimes a lawyer's communication is in the way a little bit, because sometimes lawyers just don't get along, right? It's, the clients are like, man, we just want to resolve this. And I've called some lawyer and they tell you to go F yourself. And you're like, wait a minute, I'm calling about a Tuesday exchange point. Like, that's why I'm pretty hesitant to get on the phone sometimes, because I don't like that to get in the way of what I do, which is, here's the deal. You don't like the deal. Let's go to the black robe and let's get after it.
And as a client, I think you're also afraid to bring something up to your client. I mean, I remember that when I was in my divorce, I had questions, but I didn't like certain things. But can I bring this up to my attorney and say this, because is the attorney still representing me the same way after I had some maybe constructive criticism or some questions? And in this case, if I have a consultant, I can bring up my concerns, and then I hear, no, this is done the right way. Your concerns are not valid or not important. This is really how we need to do this, or we do it this way because of this judge or this court or whatever. Or do I have a concern that needs to be addressed, but it's not going to be addressed by me, by a third person, and the attorney can treat me the same way? I think that's a big fear. I've heard that many times. Can I say to my attorney that I need more communication? Can I actually say that I don't like this? Or because it's for us getting divorced or getting modifications done, child custody, this is our life. And for the attorney, it's a job, it's their job. So it's that, I think sometimes is the fear for many clients. Are they really fighting for me like this is their own child, or is it just another job and I got to do this because this is I get paid for that? That's a big difference, I think.
So we can kind of dovetail into this other area too, which is you also working as an attorney out of jurisdiction, whether it be as a divorce consultant, because you get a lot of calls, a lot of inquiries from people who aren't in the Dallas-Fort Worth area who want your opinion. So how can you help those people when they're out of jurisdiction here in Texas?
The jurisdiction piece is a very, very important aspect when you're dealing with venue. Okay, so jurisdiction is state that you're in, and so obviously I'm licensed in Texas. That's the jurisdiction. The venue piece is something that, you know, I add value in various ways from a standpoint of different venues have different procedures. Okay, and you know, you always hear about we need local counsel because the attorney knows the judge or they understand the policies and procedures. And I definitely agree with that, okay, in many, many circumstances. What bothers me is what I've seen, you know, we get in these high profile cases, athletes, you know, they relocate from New Jersey to Texas, right? And you've got California, New Jersey, and Brooklyn, you know, all involved, right? And so when you have that, what then happens is you get kind of this patriarchal or matriarchal lawyer that is the papa or the mama of the case, right? And then they go hire local counsel. And the client thinks, well, I hired this big shot, right? And they know everything about strategic direction of a case as a whole. They know the law pretty much backwards and forwards, and they're really good about getting this case to the finish line. But then local counsel, everything is passed off to local counsel. And in that situation, what can happen, and I've seen it happen inside of the last 2 years, multiple times, is that local counsel is not as probably up to speed on big ticket items as maybe the other lawyer is, but the tendency is, well, we're going to defer to local counsel because it's easy to pass off the buck, right? And so it's not adding, like, don't keep adding lawyers, right? I said don't get 30 opinions, right? But get 3 or 4. It's always good to have that in medical, right? So if you're just trying to figure out macro policy, where we are in a case, we can do some simple consulting in that regard with the local people. I can help vet the attorney, make sure that, you know, Google reviews, for example. Anybody now in today's age knows that you can have somebody that doesn't like the pillowcase and they just blast somebody on Google. Well, we're in family law, right? It's not, you're not just itching at your fingertips to go write positive reviews for your divorce attorney, right? You're ready to get away from this whole situation. You don't want to pay them. You're tired of dealing with them. So to get a positive review is very challenging. To get a negative review can be something as simple as, I mean, I've had cases where, or clients that I don't represent, that I've done a consult for, and I'm 4.5 or 6 minutes late because I'm trying to help somebody that was right before them. And, you know, they're just like, it's like I kicked their firstborn. And I'm like, man, you know, I go to doctor's office, I sometimes sit around for 2 hours, and I'm like, but I stress out about that 4 minutes because people's time is important. But you got to be able to vet those things, because a client doesn't know. They're, you know, oftentimes they have a referral through a friend or a family member that went through a totally separate fact pattern. They then go to the Google, the end all be all right now. And, you know, they read some stuff, and sometimes they're turned away from very good lawyers based on, if you've done this for 20 years, you're going to have a few people that disagree with how their case went. To the contrary, if you've only got 4 or 5 or 6 negative reviews in 20 years and thousands of cases, that's pretty good, right? So we want to find out, like, what is the substance of those negatives? Is it real? Is it one person that faked their name 5 times? Which happens. It's happened to me. We've actually, you know, gone so far as to get injunctions against people who've done that, and it's hard to, in today's age, really trust information because there's so much information out there. So, what I would say is, if we take this from a standpoint that we're going to help vet that in different jurisdictions, specifically when you're hiring local counsel in addition to the money you've already spent on the other attorney. That's a big piece. For the most part, and I'll wrap that up with, for the most part, the laws aren't any different, right? The application, well, naturally the laws aren't different because they're Texas laws, but the application of the laws can be very different, and the time at which the laws are applied can really significantly change based on which jurisdiction you're in. For example, you've got, let's just take it to Johnson County versus San Antonio. San Antonio, you roll into the courtroom and it's kind of a free for all. Announce your time. There's a bunch of different judges. They disperse you into different courtrooms. You don't know which court you're going into, right? In a temporary orders hearing, unless you have it special set. You go into, Tarrant County, we have associate courts. You're going to be in front of the associate judge. Parker County, you go in there, you're in front of the district judge. No right to de novo appeal. Those are things that, the local councils kind of know those things, but then when you step that further, okay, anybody can read the local rules, but all right, what's going to happen big picture wise? And I think that gets lost in the minutia when you have local counsel with big ticket lawyer, and there's also egos involved. Believe me, lawyers all have egos that I've seen.
Really?
Some of them. I try not to.
So all right, you guys, let's wrap this up. Any final thoughts on the benefits of divorce consulting? Andrea, you would love to hear you weigh in from your perspective as a former client of Justin's. And Justin, if you have any other thoughts as well before we wrap up.
No, I would say it's always a good idea to get the second opinion in the consultation. We said that before. You need to, you were going to spend a lot of time with that attorney, and then while you have a case pending and you don't feel like it's going the way you want it to go, or you have so many questions or questions are not answered, I think it's a great opportunity. And the cost is always, you got to look at the cost and the loss potentially. I mean, a friend of mine going into mediation and not knowing where all the money is at. So the attorney was trying to push her to go to mediation. Well, do I do this or don't I do this? And if you look at it, does it make sense maybe to hire somebody for an additional $10,000 to help me navigate that and help her in that case to do it? Or do I follow my lawyer's advice and go into mediation and potentially don't find the money or have other ramifications? I think that's why, just like a doctor, like we said at the beginning, a second opinion will help you in certain situations. Not for everybody, but I think there are situations where this is a great way to make sure that you going down the right path.
Yeah, and I just like to add, I don't want this to seem super complex. In certain situations, there are, we can knock out what we call consulting in a consult, right? So people that have a couple $100 and not 10,000 to bring me into some high end case, they sometimes can get the value that they needed just through hearing that in a 30-minute consult. So there are different levels, there are different cost structures. And I really want to try to pin that cost to added value. Most of the consulting we've done has transitioned to future business, or the client in situations where the lawyer was bad, they want to hire us. And I'm still pretty hesitant to do that because I feel like my role is a little bit different as a consultant, and sometimes we're just at a bandwidth issue. I mean, you catch me in January, February, good luck, right? So I can't get to the clients as fast as I need to command, the value that I demand for our team. So sometimes a consulting piece is how I get around that to be able to help somebody, where I can't go over to court. I can't do a deposition. I can't do the discovery. So it allows me to spread myself a little bit laterally, if you will. It's not arrogance either. I remember the pastors that started these churches where they're broadcasting themselves. It's like, well, you think you're God's gift to the church. No, man, sometimes people just like that person, and you want to be able to spread that if they like you and they're receiving you as far as you can and help as many people as you can. It's not arrogance, and it's certainly not that the attorneys don't have the ability to do their job. It's to try to help.
I think that's a great spot to wrap up, you guys. So if you live in Texas, if you have questions about divorce consulting and how that may benefit you, you can certainly contact the Sisemore Law Firm. And you can reach the firm at 817-336-4444 or visit lawyerdfw.com. We also invite you to follow the podcast and share it with friends who might find it helpful. Thanks so much for listening in, and have a great day.
Thank you for listening to In Your Best Interest with Texas divorce attorney and entrepreneur Justin Sizemore. The content presented here is provided for information only and should not be construed as legal, tax, or financial advice. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available.